My name is Lapdiang Syiem, and I'm an artist, a performer. I'm based here in Shillong in Meghalaya. This is where I come from. And I've spent 18 years of my life at home, and then I moved out for my bachelor's. I moved to Chennai, did my bachelor's in biotechnology and botany. And then it was there that I discovered this other space, the theater space. And I grew up very shy and very almost, my mom used to call me a wallflower. But I discovered the theater space, and I discovered that I had a voice, that I could be part of plays, and so I took part in amateur theater plays. And since then, I looked up about the National School of Drama, the whole procedure, how to get in, and I joined NSD. And since then, the theater or performance has become my life. Moved away to Copenhagen for 2 years after NSD, specialized in physical theater. And then since 2016, I've been back home, based in Shillong, based in my hometown, and creating my own work. When I was in Copenhagen, it really started with a longing to come back. I'd been away for 2 years and didn't come back during those 2 years. And even though I loved that freedom, I loved being in a different country, completely different culture, it was really exciting. But after a point, I almost felt like, my existence sort of needed something else. Perhaps, now when I talk about it with my mom, I say, maybe I'm looking for my roots. I think I was in Europe, I was a part of different theater groups, was performing around. But I somehow felt that I kept questioning what this identity of mine is. So yeah, that got me back. So I think for me, coming back, I sort of had this, romanticizing coming back, claiming that space, claiming that identity. And the thing is that when I came back here and I confronted the reality here, confronted, the social environment here, I realized coming back is a lot more complex. I do, I speak about, even now in my work, I talk about what it means to me to come back to come from a matrilineal society. I talk about what matrilineal could mean. But at the same time, I also look at it from a lens of, challenging it, critiquing it, being engaged with it, that it's not just, this symbol of how you define the Khasi people or the Khasi women, but it's actually a living and breathing culture that needs to evolve, that needs to constantly be examined and re-examined. So that's how it is for me. I think a continuous process of re-examination of what my surroundings are, what my environment is. A space that for me was very important in being involved in is the market space, the local traditional market. I wouldn't call it traditional anymore. I would say, the local markets called Yodo that is run predominantly by women. And one thing that still stands out to me, that's something that I've imbibed, I think, through my grandmother, my mother as well, is how women have always been economically independent. They exist. They also exist in this other space outside the home, a space where they are economically independent. So I came back and I started to see the life of the market space, started to talk to these women to understand, this other space that they exist in. At the same time, we talk about, so if you think of the matrilineal culture, you think of the lineage. First of all is the family name. The lineage is passed through the mother. So I carry like my mother's name, my grandmother's name, all the offspring carry that name. And the youngest daughter is supposed to be to inherit the ancestral property, but at the same time, she also bears the responsibility of looking after the family home, of taking care of the older parents. So it has, and I know now, when I interact with my peers, uh, with my friends, the ones who are the youngest daughters talk about how they've gone out to study, and there's an expectation for them now to come back home to reclaim the space, the responsibility of being the youngest daughter. And they also start to question this, like, what if they don't want to come back? What if they don't want to be responsible for it being the youngest daughter? Can things start to change? Can you start to question the system? So yeah, I mean, we also have like very high rate of domestic abuse. So even within the matrilineal structure, there's still a certain amount of patriarchy that still exists, I feel. Well, so the thing is with the customary rights to land is that sort of like the property belongs to the family, and that property is passed on through the daughters, through passed on to the youngest daughter, passed on to and the property is in the name of the woman, the female member of the family, also, yeah, in her name, in her clan's name. Now, a recent case, I guess, to bring up a recent case, was that there was the Khasi lineage bill that came up, and this was in 2018. There was this huge, agitation that when this had come up, because it said that it also spoke about the status of Khasi women, and also said that Khasi women, by virtue of marrying outside of the community, they're also giving away these lands, and the ancestral property, the lands, to the outsider through marriage, and so you sort of have like the very conservative Khasi patriarchs who said, okay, let's deprive the right of if a woman were to marry outside of the community, she loses her Khasi status. So in that way, we protect the ancestral properties. She's not the one selling off these lands. But actually, the case is that the state, the government itself, is giving away prime land, to corporations, to industries. That's not being addressed. Instead, a petty issue is taken up, and kind of the onus is put on the woman. That's a huge topic, and for me, I think in whatever little way through my art, obviously I'm not an environmentalist, but I am an environmentalist, I guess, activist through my art, and I address it the way I see it affect my community. So a lot of the coal mining issue is a huge issue that is disrupting, or that's disruptive, destroying the hills that we have here. The limestone quarries, the cement factories. My father was actually involved way back in 97, 98, 99. He was very much actively involved in writing against the Uranium Corporation of India that wanted to come and set up a company here because we have a resource of uranium. So a lot of these industries, that kind of find these resources here, and they come in, bringing in scientists, experts from outside, but not really taking into consideration what is going on in the communities, not really speaking to the lives of the people that will be affected, the land that will be destroyed, the fertile agricultural land that is being damaged. So for me, specializing in physical theater, uh, looking at my body as this, as a storyteller or my tool of expression. I'm, I, const, I, and I think I got to that point also because I struggled with language when I was at NSD, because the language of expression was in Hindi, and I couldn't use my mother tongue. I couldn't speak in English, so I started to examine if I go back to the body and if I, can I overcome the language barriers, and does the body have a language of its own? That's how the journey began for me. When I came back here and started to create performances, the because we don't have sort of a conventional tradition of what the theater is. We don't have auditoriums or stages where people would go and watch theater shows. We do have them in the Jankia Hills, but only it's not very active though here where I come from, the Khasi Hills. Also, it's yet to evolve, yet to take on new shape. So bringing in, using physical theater, using my body as a storyteller became something very important to me also as a woman. Um, and with the coal mining performance, when the incident happened of the miners who were trapped in a coal mine, and this was in 2018, where they were trapped, 13 miners were trapped. And it was so, they were trapped there, trying for anybody to react to that. And I realized for me as an artist, what is the story I want to tell? Facts are out there, the scientific facts out there, the reactions from people, but what about what was actually going on with the miners? And I felt for me, using this piece of a child trapped in a boulder, calling out for his mother, was something that really signified the struggle for me. And I could use a Khasi folktale, to talk about what this issue is, to talk about that struggle. At each moment, the child is saying, my feet are being sucked in, my waist is being sucked in, my chest, I can't breathe, my neck. And this gave way, and he's calling out to his mother. And for me, this was such a strong image, such a strong story, to talk about what it means to feel trapped, to try and understand that. And also looking at another Khasi legend also of Klen, which is supposed to be the serpent that lures people who travel in odd numbers into the forests, sort of lures them and captures them and eats them. And somehow looking at the Klen as the symbol of greed and the symbol of corruption that exists, that sort of wants to consume. I also wanted to tell that story, that other side of the story. As I said, just looking at using these folk tales that we have to talk about an issue, to make it relatable to the audience here, is something that I've been trying to do. And the body very much plays a very important role for me as an artist. It's a mixed response. I think I came back and started to perform in English, not in Khasi. And because I've been away from home all these years, I became more comfortable expressing in English, and it's something that distresses me. It's something that I'm working on because I want to get more used to speaking in Khasi as well. So yeah, people's reactions, some of them are like, okay, she's come back and she uses English. What about her reach to other parts of the state, to other people? And there are the others who also say, who kind of make fun. I've got a comment on one of my YouTube videos where someone says, "What nonsense is this?" Or what sort of clown show is this? So it's really a mix of reactions. But generally, I've been, because along with my performances, I've also had discussions after my performances with audience. engaged in dialogue, asked them what have they felt, how have they felt about the piece. So it's an ongoing dialogue, ongoing communication. I think sometimes you shut off uh, some of the feedback that are not constructive and continue with your work. So for me, of course, definitely. And I think for me, with each performance, new challenges come up, new confrontations. I remember my last performance, which was with the Welsh, which was the Welsh and Khasi cultural dialogues, which was with a team from Wales. We were looking at the history of the Welsh missionaries who had come to the Khasi Hills. And I had this performance, and so I play many roles within the performance. And there's this one scene where I play the Khasi warrior who fights with the outsider. This whole concept of the outsider, and it also draws from it also draws from a folk story of the stag who crosses into the Khasi Hills and he gets killed. So there was this scene where I kind of play the Khasi warrior, and after the performance there was a gentleman who made a comment, who was really angry, and he said, Khasi women cannot be warriors. And this was just like this year itself. I think it was in February, I think. Yeah, sometime in February, if I'm not mistaken. And he said, Khasi women cannot be warriors. And he said, your role is to play your role as a woman is the custodian of the ancestral property. How can you depict yourself as a warrior? I think this was something that really stood out to me, that really shocked me. And yet, how do you engage then with this? Of course, everybody else in the audience just tried to shut him off, but I think it's also important to, how do you engage with this? How do they look at you? Also, a lot of things, like when the Khasi lineage bill sort of came up or was proposed. Again, I wasn't at home during that time. I was traveling, and I heard about this, and it angered me. And I wrote 2 poems about it to say, "You man, who are you to decide what my identity is? My identity is mine to choose." And also wrote this really, 2 very angry poems that challenged this. So different ways, small steps, but yet standing true to, and maybe perhaps another small instant is when I was rehearsing for this other play of a mother holding a child. I was wearing my trousers and I had my legs apart and breastfeeding the baby. Someone who had watched the rehearsal said, Khasi women or women will not, put their legs apart, but they would sit sideways to breastfeed. And I said, really, this was feedback coming from a man. And for me, it said, no, I can sit how I want. I'm a woman. This is my body. I sit how I want. I breastfeed the way I want to. So yeah, just, small things that keep cropping up from each performance, from each piece. I guess, with the performances outside, I think the challenge there for me is to see. I think somehow there's been sort of this sort of view of the Northeast. There's a tend to sort of exoticize what the Northeast is, or a tendency to sort of club this Northeast identity as one. And as a friend of mine had said, we think of this Northeast identity only when we step out of the Northeast. Inside the Northeast, we are so many different identities, so many different cultures. And when I'm performing again outside, I would like to to make sure that my story is just one in so many other stories. It doesn't define one particular identity. It doesn't define just the Northeast identity. It defines me as a woman, my own story, me as Khasi, me as Lapdiang. So to engage outside the state, of course, a lot more questions. People are a lot more interested in where I come from. Being a minority culture, minority community, they're more interested. How do I come to this? They try and find points of where they can relate to the work that I do, the topics, the subject matter that I create. So yeah. So I think for me, uh, it starts from with every story that I tell. It starts from a very personal space. Um, it has to start from a personal space, and I can't expect to sort of understand all these uh, lives that I portray. I can't expect to. Of course, I can empathize. Of course, I can talk about it. Um, but first, how do I personally connect to it emotionally? Uh, mentally, intellectually, physically. And also, it starts from a point of vulnerability, putting yourself, allowing yourself to, I think, confronting where you are, being honest with, the position you occupy. Why do you want to tell the story? How are you going to tell it? What is the responsibility you have? How you relate to the audience? Um, and like I said, it does begin with, for me, at least most of my work that I've done starts from a very personal space where I show myself, the artist, first, my views, my opinions, um, yeah, my vulnerabilities. My house sits on top of a cliff. And the locality that I come from is called Riat Samthia, which means the sleepy cliff or sleepy gorge. And the house actually overlooks this river uh, that now has started to resemble a drain. It's become so dirty. And, during the monsoons, we get the stench of the river come up, right to our house, which is really sad. And this is my, the ancestral home, because my grandparents' home, uh, this was their home. And my mum, being the youngest daughter, she came to live here. I was born here, raised here. Um, and the house has a basement, a lot of spaces. So it's also the space where my stories have, when I got back in 2016, stories where I've used the space also as my rehearsal space, use this house to sort of a space where I begin to write my stories and start to create my stories. And the performance we did way back in 2013 was part of the Monolith Festival here in Meghalaya. And I had friends from the NSD who came. So I had like, my colleagues, actors, designers, directors who came to help me with this piece. And we used the basement as a rehearsal space. Um, and our script was also devised around this Khasi folktale, uh, which was called Katiularun, which was about the Khasi, that looked into the Khasi matrilineal structure, the presence of the sister, the brother who becomes the maternal uncle eventually, and who is responsible for the affairs of his sister, who's responsible for her offspring. So this was what the piece was, and the basement. We were performing in an amphitheater. The real space was an amphitheater, but we had the basement to rehearse in, which was really, just really nice. So definitely a lot of characters that we have. I mean, um, if you look at a lot of our stories, they draw from their stories about, of course, they look at nature, uh, characters, animals, birds, beasts, in a way, and then you have, that describes the community that we are. So the Thlen, for example, is supposed to be, this. this creature that exists. And using Tlen as a metaphor to describe the corruption, the greed that's happening now, I guess the Tlen would represent. I look at it like in many in different different stories, different generations. The Tlen can always be used as a metaphor for a lot of different things, and that's the thing with folklore, with folk tales. The material is out there for you to interpret, for you to take and interpret the way you want, the way you would like the interpretation to happen. And because we're all of us, growing up, we're exposed to these stories right from the time we are very small, from our parents, our grandparents. And there's a continuous sort of, each story will have its own version, each story will have its own meaning, each story will probably have its own lesson to tell. And it depends on who's telling the story. There's no like one authorship or one standard version of this is how the story is. But these stories constantly evolve, constantly adapt in the retelling. Who's telling them? In what context? Why is it being told? And also start to take on a different meaning through the generations. Also, they're starting to be forgotten, which is something really sad, actually. A lot more characters, yes. I've dealt with characters of a stag who comes from the plains and who sees, the Khasi hills, the lush Khasi hills, and he's looking for this very special wildflower. He leaves his mother behind and he climbs the hills to try and get this wildflower called Ujanga Ujatang. But he's shot by hunters, and then the deer, his mother, follows, comes looking for him. And then she sees her son's body being carried by hunters, pierced by a rusted arrow, being carried by hunters, and she lets out this cry, this lamentation. And it's that song that says that, that song, her cry has taught the Khasis how to mourn. Her cry has taught the Khasis how to lament. So a lot of these stories do, they have so many different characters. A society that's very much closely related to nature. We have, so much of our forests, our lands here, so much the biodiversity that we have, which is at the moment, of course, being threatened as well. Yes, definitely, an ongoing engagement. As I mentioned, of course, a lot of these stories are being forgotten now, because with access to a more global sort of, we're more like in a globalized culture. We have access to so many different cultures and so many other stories coming in from outside, so many different influences. Some of these stories are being forgotten. We don't also have the concept of sitting around the fireplace or around the hearth, telling each other stories. Now it's a different culture of, we've got the television, we've got the internet, we've got a different engagement altogether. But I think for me as an artist, it's important to keep the stories alive. It's always important, but it's also important how you reinterpret the stories. Yeah, perhaps I think we need to re-examine their relevance. Perhaps, we're no longer, so for example, like a small example, like the river I mentioned, that you see from the house, it's now become this drain. It is a flowing river, but it's now become this drain, and there's a stench that keeps coming up every time the monsoons come. And that river, actually, where my grandparents lived, where my mum grew up, that space there was a space that brought out stories of tigers in the night, of this demon or the spirit who would walk with an itchy back and get people to scratch his back. And you would hear sounds of different wild sounds of animals, of birds coming, because bamboo groves everywhere, forests everywhere. And so it gives scope for the imagination to connect to what you have. But now what's happened is, of course, the bamboo groves are lost. The river is dirty, filthy. You see the plastic. You see, the stench that emanates from it, and it brings together a whole different. The imagination changes. The way we look at the river changes. The way we interact with the river now changes. So a lot of these elements, I think, contribute to why perhaps some of these stories are lost. With modernity, yes, a lot of influences, which I think is important, where the culture, the society needs to evolve. I talk about going back to reclaim my roots, my identity, but I also understand as a contemporary performer that I do want to evolve with the times. My influences come from everywhere, so I wouldn't go back and say, oh, I'm going to be stuck in traditions, I'm going to be stuck in something that is old-fashioned. No, I understand we need to constantly, as I said, like adapt that, reinterpret what this is. So yeah, perhaps modernity as well plays a role in what is the relevance of these stories now. Is there a need to tell them? What stories do the younger children want to listen to? What do they have access to? So all these different questions, I guess. Yes, a lot of these concerns, especially the environmental concerns, are very urgent at the moment, that should be addressed. The river has changed shape, the river has changed, and not by any fault of the river, but it's, what we humans have done to that river, how we've destroyed it, how we've abused it. And I think now, new stories will definitely emerge. I was having a discussion with my mum about, the whole thing of urban legends. We've gotten, we're here now in an urban space. This place where I live in right now, used to be is one of the oldest localities, of course, here in Shillong. But now, sort of, the spaces are changing, new stories. So, urban legends, urban stories. If I were to tell this to the next generation to talk about the river, I would have to tell them about the fear, when I walk on the road next to it during the monsoons, the river could rise up, sweep onto the road, or talk about. So it also overlooks the cemetery. My house overlooks the river, the road, and then the cemetery. And before, my great grandmom would, they'd walk through the forest to travel, on foot from one place to another. Now it's a cemetery. Now it's full of stories of, like, young, women cannot travel there alone. Drug addiction. The cemetery has become this hotspot of people gathering there. We have problems with drug abuse, drug addiction, and suddenly fears. In the past, we had fears of spirits, fears of ghosts. Now we have fears of what the human race is capable of doing to each other, the harm we're capable of inflicting. So it's important to address all that. It is important, again, not just to romanticize perhaps the stories, you have the memories, but if you were to tell them now, again, like, how do you reinterpret them? How do you reimagine these stories? How do they, again, like I said, what is their relevance now in the society? So yes, engage with it in the sense, I here at home from my family, my brother's an ecologist, my dad's a farmer, and discussions about what the EIA is about, and in the context of the northeast of where we are, it's been interesting for me. It's been interesting to kind of read about it, to listen to what the concerns that my my brother raises, and where, you know, as I said, so much of biodiversity is here. It's a biodiverse hotspot, and at the same time, sort of like, we don't have, so for example, we also have the resources, we have the coal resource, we have uranium, we have this and that, so you get a sense of the factories wanting to come in, the factories wanting to establish this, factories wanting to establish that. And the community, the indigenous minority community as well, how much of that dialogue is actually happening with the communities involved. So an example, we've got our farm here, and they built a bypass through a lot of the land, but the people who actually owned that land had no access to understanding what was being taken from them. You know, what is the compensation that they should be getting? Okay, what is going to happen? What is going to happen? They're going to be displaced from their lands. Do they have a say in it? Do they even understand? Like, is it these corporations that come in? You know, is there even a dialogue that's happening with the local community here? And also issues of how it's affecting the community, how things are just happening, like I guess with the new EIA, the 2020 draft, they speak about sort of this period of assessing, or this period of consultation with the local communities has actually been lessened to 20 days from, which was earlier 30 days. And 20 days itself, you know, in remote areas, in remote places that will be affected, how do you get this information across? How do you, so it really needs to be addressed, and it really needs to be questioned. You know, the draft needs to be questioned. It needs to be it's also very complex for me, and I'm still, I think, you know, understanding the whole technicality of it. I'm still in the process of listening to my brother, listening to what he has to say, and trying to understand, you know, what are the dire consequences, effects of this. Yes, here in Meghalaya, there were, you know, people who had organized a series of online discussions, bringing in environmentalists, ecologists, at the same time musicians to talk about this, artists to talk about this. We also have very young, dynamic people, young, dynamic students who have taken up this cause into the streets and who have gone about with their protests. So it is being taken up by people from all walks of life. Of course, with the pandemic now, the protests against it are kind of being restricted. We're kind of stuck in this space of, you know, this frame through online discussions, online meetings that's happening. But definitely people are aware of it and are raising a voice against it. Affected me a lot personally. I've just been, before this I traveled a lot, of course. I did a lot of traveling with my performances, and I love to travel when I get the opportunity, of course. That has stopped. I keep sort of looking at my suitcases and having this internal dialogue with them, saying, oh, they're gathering dust, that sort of thing. Also at the same time, because, you know, I have no access to performing in front of an audience, I no longer can get people to assemble and watch me perform. My performances have gone online through videos and all that, but it's not the same for me. I crave that human interaction, that human response. So a small example, I think I was shooting a performance that very recently that speaks about the pandemic for me, how it's affecting me. And I was shooting it with this friend. There were just three of us in the room, and she had her mask on and she had a camera and she was shooting me. And I had this bulb, this focus on me, and I'm speaking and I'm enunciating, I'm speaking out my lines, and I see sort of my saliva just flying in the air, flying about, and suddenly it just shook me. I thought, so much of using the voice, so much of expressing yourself, you're suddenly kind of your reflexes are sort of inhibited. The way you behave, respond is kind of, you take a step back now. Everything is behind a mask. So it's been very difficult, depressing. But I think I should also accept that I am one of the privileged ones to have food. I have my house, I can come back to my family, I'm staying with my family. And perhaps be aware of my space right now, but how do I also try and help, with the local community here? How do I try and make things easier? So it started with a lot of chaos. It started with a lot of fear, with a lot of anxiety, and now with the pandemic, of course, it's sad to say, but the government has not really implemented a proper plan. Livelihoods are being lost. Things that should have, measures that should have been taken during the lockdown to say, okay, how do we look at the businesses, the local businesses to continue? Nothing of that has been done. The cases are now increasing. We've got, the street vendors, the hawkers, who suddenly find that there's no livelihood for them. They can't be selling their wares. They can't be selling the fruits and vegetables that you would normally find out, on the streets, fresh fruits and vegetables. Now there's sort of so much of confusion. So a lot of it's as you said, it's happening everywhere, all over the world. So yeah. So for me, being trained in physical theatre, my performances really deal a lot with the body, the expressive body, how I use my body. And also through physical theatre, through the styles that I've been using or performing, I've been using masks or looking at the grotesque, the buffoon, looking at the body out of the conventional idea of how the body functions, but more into the expressive body, also stylized. So that's the kind of process or different styles I experiment with. I identify as a storyteller, and coming from an oral culture, coming from an oral tradition, I find my role in performance also as a storyteller. So the narrative becomes very important for me. Where I draw my narratives from. How do I tell these stories? And I usually begin with writing out my scripts and then imagining, visualizing how, along with the voice, how the body also responds, the kind of images that are evoked. So that's really my process. It keeps, of course, with the times now, it keeps changing, adapting to different mediums, different spaces. Yes, I've been working a lot with poetry and specifically my mother's poems. I draw a lot of my past performances have been inspired or have been based on the poems that she's written. And she, of course, has her own style, has her own aesthetics, the way she writes her poems. With this poem, actually, when I had the first time I'd written it in 2018, it wasn't with the intent of performing it. It was really just me, and when the amendment to this bill had come out, I wasn't even in Shillong. I wasn't even in India at that time. I was in Wales, far away, and there were a lot of emotions, and I was working on a different performance then. But my emotions, I needed to express them, and that's how the poem came into being. So it really was not intentionally; it wasn't meant to be performed. But when I got back home and I relooked at this piece, at how I've written it, something very personal, but it also relates to the larger environment we're living in, or the social environment we're living in. And I was doing this piece called "Being Human, Human Beings," which addressed violence, which addressed displacement. And then I thought, how do I bring in my identity in this? How do I talk about claiming my identity? And that's how I took this poem, and it became an excerpt of a bigger piece. So that's how it came into being placed out there in the performance space. It's definitely it's different in a lot of ways. I think here in Meghalaya, for me, it's much more challenging because I'm performing to an audience that I'm performing in the place I grew up in. I'm performing stories that people already know about, and so they're looking to say what is there anything new that she's trying to tell us? Is she just repeating what we already know, or is there anything new that she's bringing? And also knowing the people, there's a lot more of the expectation is also a lot more. But and performing outside, performing abroad, it's a different audience who are curious about, also very curious about where I come from. They This whole thing of the identity of saying, oh, she's Indian, and then starts questions with, oh, but she doesn't look uh, she's not identifiably Indian, she doesn't look Indian. Uh, she looks more, I don't know, Southeast Asian, for example, because of my features. So they kind of start to have a preconceived identity of who you are and try and fit you. So there's a lot more curiosity. There's, they're trying to understand what the performance is about. But here in Shillong, they can get much more nuanced. They can, I can deal with topics, as I said, everyday topics, but again, keep questioning them, re-questioning them, bringing out different aspects that have never been explored before. So very, very different. But for me, I find myself now juggling between these two spaces, and it's really exciting for my work and process. So this performance has had about this is the third version of this performance actually. The first one was part of the bigger performance, as I mentioned, of being human, human beings. And the second one was in collaboration with a Welsh folk musician, Gareth Bonello. So we just did a recording of the voice, and he added music that would accompany this performance. So then it was just voice. And this time, when I did it, when I filmed this the third time, it actually, I restructured the whole piece physically as well. So I experimented with new images, experimented with new movements, and when I look at it now, it is completely, it can exist as a piece in itself. So how I've structured this performance is, it's basically just the mura, which is this cane stool that I use in a lot of my performances. And it also symbolizes, for me, it becomes the space or the stage that I carry with me. So it acts as my prop, it acts as my set, it acts as my own space. And at the same time, it's also, so, a brief of what my costume is. This is sort of the basic costume that I also wear, that that I wear in all my performances. And it's really, the base is just black. It's a black top and a black wraparound. But I've used this particular cloth called the Jankarsha, which the women here wear, and it's really, the working woman's outfit. And for me, it's for me as an actor, it's something that I want to carry with me in my performances. There's, what it signifies, what it is to me as a woman. So it begins with me putting on this piece, also talking about my identity as a woman, how you target it, and this becomes my identity. And at the same time, I work with different movements using the mura in different images. It's really a space that I'm still trying to understand and navigate. And I personally miss the human to human interaction. I miss having, the audience there, present there, where I work a lot with, maintaining eye contact, looking at people, addressing them, receiving the energy from the audience, and how do I respond to it. And now moving into the digital space, I find myself really just, the emotions are just sort of brought out or evoked from within me. There is no give and take anymore. That's something I've had to deal with. And just looking at these cameras or just looking at the screen, kind of imagining who are the faces behind this, who is going to watch this, how am I going to connect to it, how do I try and bring the camera alive. So these are a lot of different issues that I'm dealing with. But at the same time, I think when we filmed this piece, also we realized that we had different versions. We had the long shot, or then we had the close-ups. And with the close-ups, you could really just focus on whether it was tying this, or whether it was how I hold on to the mura. How I work with it, how my hands. What happens to my hands at that time? What happens to my feet? What happens to my body, my face. So it's interesting also because the camera then can really come in close, and also with the digital space, a wider reach. But again, for me, it's exercising my imagination all over again, because I'm performing in an empty room with just the person who's handling the technical equipment, and just the equipment with really no emotional input, I think. So, yeah. Yeah, definitely yes. I think also, you experiment along the way. I mean, if you can, I guess if you can, because with technology, it's also expensive, like who you're working with. It requires like a person to handle the cameras, it requires renting the cameras or the stands and this and that. So in terms of that, like if you do have a setup of your own, then it's a lot easier to experiment and spend like a whole day or days just to improvise and work on it. That's one thing. So it is. I'm finding it interesting. I'm still not used to it, but the more I'm working with it, the more I'm finding new ways of improvising. And with the piece yesterday as well, when I had filmed it, um, we did many different. We tried many different versions. We said, oh, how about we experiment this way? How about we improvise this way? How about we use this angle? How about how do you work with the light and that sort of thing? I still miss the live space though. I miss here now with the recorded sort of uh, a film. You kind of aim. You want it to be perfect. You want the frame to be perfect, the angle to be perfect, this to be perfect, and you see something with your expression. You're like, maybe we try it differently. But with a live space, you don't have a chance for that. It's there. The performance exists at that point, at that time, and it has its own, you know, it's special when it exists then. So I really miss that. I miss the spontaneity of that space. This is the mask. So it's for me when I think of my introduction to physical theater was really through the mask. And the mask, because it covers your face, we're so used to expressing through our face, through our eyes, speaking. But with the mask on, you realize, there is a focus on the rest of your body and how you use the rest of your body to express. So it's a mask also that I had made, and it's paper mache with a wooden polish, and it's something that I've used it in one performance, and I've also done a short presentation with the mask also. So yeah, this piece, why I chose to perform this piece during this time is also as a woman, to address what's happening, what's happening in our country right now. And for me, it's a piece that has given me so much power to stand and say, my identity is mine to carry on. You know, I can't have a council of men trying to tell me, you lose your status by virtue of being with someone else, being with the person of your choosing, choosing a partner. So for me, it's really a piece that says that I want to speak out, and that I hope that audience who watch it as well will say, yes, you have no right to what my identity is. You have no right to treat my body this way. I have the control of my body. I have, this is what my right is. And um, I think it's really difficult. It also it performing it also, I think, got me a bit emotional as well, or got me into the space of just really expressing my frustration and anger as a woman, demanding her right, and also saying, don't touch my identity. My identity is mine. That's yeah. So this performance that I'm going to tell you about, it's called "To the Men with Hate Speech on Their Lips." And it was actually, I'd written it as a poem in 2018, and this was a response to a particular bill that was proposed or that was amended actually in 2018. And this was the Khasi social custom of lineage. And this was proposed by the Khasi Hills Autonomous District Council. And what was problematic about this bill was that it looked at, it looked into the status of Khasi women. And the bill states that if a Khasi woman marries a non-Khasi man, she would lose her Khasi status as well as her offspring. But the bill actually does not apply to the Khasi men because of, by virtue of us being a matrilineal culture. So this bill was proposed, and it really disturbed a lot of us at that time, and it was also infringing upon our rights as women to claim our identity, and that's what this piece is about. This poem is about. So yeah, just a brief of what it is.
They tried to stop me, Them, the ones who framed the Khasi lineage bill. The bill states that if Khasi women marry non-Khasi men, they shall lose their Khasi status. But it so conveniently does not apply to the men. To the men with hate speech on their lips. You target me because I am a woman. I am an easy and vulnerable target. Tell me, do you feel more powerful to think of me this way? You spit profanities in my face, my being, my body. You, man, you. You who have separated man from human. You who are bitter because I choose to love someone else. Someone from not within these borders. I pity you. I pity you. I pity you. For you cry and whimper, threatening rape and abuse, because I choose to love someone else, someone from not within these borders. I pity you. I pity you. I am my own woman, and my identity lies beyond the bills and laws your petty councils implement. I am my own woman. I carry the matriline of my grandmother, and her grandmother, and hers. Surely my grandmother would be turning in her grave to hear your profanities. My matriline is mine to pass on, dear man. You who are insecure in his own identity, like a spoiled child snatching that which you consider more valuable. If you were not so vulnerable, perhaps you'd understand. Perhaps you'd understand. I repeat. That my identity is mine to carry and pass on to the next generation. I weep for you will never be able to touch it, let alone define it. Surely, surely your petty bill does stand.